Good evening. We'll call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Please take roll call, please.
Langenheim,
Yeah, he's here. Roll call.
Maxwell, yes. All right. Maxwell, McGuire, Michaels, Mitchell, Petrie, Quisenberry, Richards,
Here.
Rosales,
Here.
Schwartz, Alex, Berkson, Carter, Coert, Esri, Harper, Hartke, James, Jay, Kibler, and Schrader.
We have a quorum present. Next on the agenda, approval of minutes. Mr. Carter, motion.
So moved.
Okay. Second, Mr. Langenheim. Any dis- Sorry, thanks. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now, approval of the agenda. Mr. Rosales, second. Mr. Mitchell, sorry. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, motion carries. Public participation, I have one name signed in. Mr. Kilgore, if you would, please.
Good evening, James Kilgore, 511 South Draper, Champaign. I wanted to speak just a little bit to the proceedings at the last Financial Committee meeting. I think, first of all, I just wanted to assure some people that, addressing particularly the reentry program, that the reentry program does impact everyone throughout the county, and that the county board has a responsibility over criminal justice and over dealing with people who are involved in the criminal justice system. And it involves the entire range of the community, not simply certain sectors of the community. So I think it's important that all county board members get on board with that responsibility in terms of the criminal justice system. Having said that, I'm quite pleased that the county board has allocated $200,000 for social programs. Of course, we know it's never enough from our side, but $200,000 is a very good start in terms of starting to do some things differently, and in particular to facilitate the beginnings of a reentry program in this county. And I hope that the county board will ensure that a significant amount of that money is set aside for reentry, simply because there was concern at the last meeting about the lack of a complete proposal for reentry. However, I think we have to recognize that the reentry program is in a different state than other programs in the county. That is, it is yet to be established. And yet we have quite a number of guidelines and directions for what that program might look like. We have quite a detailed proposal from the Community Justice Task Force. We have quite a few important suggestions from the ILPP, including the notion that a reentry program is central to changing the criminal justice system. We also have a proposal that was driven by ILPP in Allegheny County, which I believe Chairman Kurtz circulated to the board members as well. So I think there's a general idea about what such a program might look like. And I think the two things the county board needs to do now, which I hope will be done tonight or as soon as possible, is one, to make sure that money is set aside for that reentry program, and that it doesn't, that none of this social programs money finds its way back into other budget lines where it doesn't belong. And secondly, that we have some clarity in terms of having a procedure by which a proposal can be fully developed and implemented as soon as possible. So I hope that will be part of your deliberations in terms of charting the way forward for changes in the criminal justice system in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kilgore. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak tonight from the audience? Seeing none, we will proceed with communications. Ms. Busey, I believe you have one.
Yes, I would like to introduce to the board Van Anderson, our new Deputy County Administrator of Finance, who started today. And Van, if you would come up and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and pleasure to be working for Champaign County. I've been a citizen of this county for over 31 years now. I came here to attend the University of Illinois at the doctoral level. I received a doctorate in genetics in 1987 and then started right into administrative posts on the campus. And over the years, as my duties and responsibilities increased, and especially with budget, finance, those kind of things, I went back and received a Master's of Business Administration from the university in 2002. So the really good thing about my experience at the university is it covered all areas that administrative services here covers for the county. And so I've got some experience in all of those areas. In-depth experience, of course, in the finance and budgeting areas, HR areas, grants and contracts areas as well. And so at the university, I served on multiple budget committees. That includes oversight of the administrative budgets on campus and also oversight of the academic budgets on campus, so all of the college budgets. And then was also appointed to special budget committees that went in and looked at specific units that were in trouble to help them find a way out of that trouble. And so the good news is that with all that experience, I can bring that to the county here. I did retire from the University of Illinois in June of 2011, and so I'm coming out of retirement now into this post, which I really look forward to.
Thanks, Van.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Van. Welcome, and we look forward to years of working with you. Any other communications from the board? Mr. McGuire.
Sure. I just want to make everybody aware of the open house of the Champaign County Youth Assessment Center, which will be at 402 North Randolph Street tomorrow from 4 to 6 p.m. And it's a program to help our at-risk kids in the community. The communities come together to support this program, and I think it'll have a great impact on those youth and their families. So appreciate your support.
Any other communications? Seeing none, let's move ahead to our committee reports. Ms. Bergson, Justice and Social Services.
We have someone here to give a report for Head Start.
I'll just go right back up. A little like a ping pong. All right, it's red, so it's on when it's red. All right, well, hello, everyone. I haven't been here for quite some amount of time. I see a lot of familiar faces, but also a lot of faces that I don't know. So I hope this evening I can share personally with you about our Head Start program, and that you'll, if you have any questions, I'm always available for those, whether it's this evening or at any other time. So I do have in front of you then a couple of reports. The blue and yellow pages are pages that are 2 reports we are required to give you. The first, the top in blue, is the annual report on child outcomes for our program. And I want to point out to you that while we report on all of the children internally, this report is about the children who left us for kindergarten this year. And we have a comparison with our 2011-2012 year, and then our 2012-2013 year that we finished as of August 31st. This report does include children with disabilities who are in our program, and about 10% of our children do have a disability. So that is the requirement for our enrollment, that we offer at least 10% of our enrollments to a child with a disability. This is our final report, as I said, of the 2012-2013 year. We have 4 reporting periods in the school year, and after every reporting period, we do share the information on the individual children with the parent. As you'll see, we do have some statistical information regarding the makeup of our enrollment at the top of the page, and then the lower 2/3 of the page is devoted to reporting on the developmental areas. You'll see that the overall development of the children indicates that 90% of the children left us deemed ready to enter kindergarten in regard to their cognitive, physical development, and that includes all of these subcategories of development, social, emotional, cognitive, physical, language, on down the report. We do have a number of areas that are below 90%. We have a few of those, and in those areas, we do analyze based on what we see is needed to provide additional resources or training to the staff, and that can be, our reports are done by classroom, by location, and then the whole program. We can also obtain reports. As you can see, this report is about the children leaving for kindergarten. We can obtain a report on the children who are 3 years old. We can obtain a report on just the girls, so we can adjust our reports to look at any particular grouping of children that we so desire. So do you have any questions in regard to this outcomes report?
I had understood that low-income children were not limited in mathematics, that the problem was linguistic, yet I see that it's mathematics where they're not operating up to schedule.
Yes, we do find that science and mathematics is, those 2 areas are the lower areas for our children, even in the last 2 years. Now, you cannot really compare 1 year of children to another year of children because we have a different group each year, even though we have some children returning. And we use that information primarily to check on how are the teachers doing with their groups of children. For instance, numbers and operations fell this year, and while, again, we can't compare groups of children from 1 year to another, we are looking at what more can we provide to teachers so that any children in any year, they will be better, have more strategies and have more resources in order to help those children achieve in any areas.
But is it not true that in most cases, the low-income children are not limited in the mathematical area? This is what
If you know of a particular report that demonstrates that, I'm not familiar with it. This information is consistent with what this is the year-end information, and it is consistent with what we observed at every period during the last school year, that the mathematical information was one of the areas lowest for all of our children.
Thank you.
So, okay.
Yes?
Hi.
Sorry, you're right. I'm going to focus a bit on what Ms. Bergson was asking you about, and then I have a second question. You have given us only 2 years' worth of data here. If we looked at this longitudinally back 5 years or 10 years, are these 80% percentages here indicative of what has been happening on a longitudinal pattern?
At the moment, at the top of my head, I cannot remember prior, I'm resorting to what is on this paper, and I can certainly look for that in our previous years.
Well, I think that might be interesting, even though I understand the argument perfectly that your population really is different each time, so it is apples and oranges. However, if we see a longitudinal trend, then there might be other things that need to be fine-tuned.
Well, and as I
Okay.
said, primarily because we know we can't do anything about the group of children each year is a unique group.
Right.
Whether or not there's returning children, still, the mix is a unique group. And so we do focus on teacher training and resources every year.
Okay, and then second, there's a 100-student drop between the two columns. Is there a reason that this is occurring?
No, we are required to take children into our program based on family need, and it could have been that in this particular year that there weren't as many 4-year-olds in our program overall.
But I thought I remembered from RPC meetings that there were some budgetary constraints, and you did have to cut back on how many children could be accepted. Am I remembering accurately?
You are remembering that we did cut 44 children from our program at the end of the school year. This information really
before that.
It is through June, through August, but those children would have gone home already for the school year anyway.
Okay, okay.
So it is reflective of our total enrollment of Head Start children, the 197, those who were leaving for kindergarten. And it is not affected by the fact that this new school year, we were down 20 enrollments in Head Start.
Okay, and then I hope during your presentation, you will cover how the federal government's tantrum that they're having right now is affecting what's happening with Head Start. And then is your funding only from the federal government, or do you have other sources of funding? So thank you very much.
Sure. All right, I'll move along then. Another report that I'm required to provide to our governing bodies is one that you receive every month. The first report is periodic. You get that at the end of the reporting year. But you receive every month, or you can find that on our website, the daily attendance by for Champaign County Head Start, and then on the back of the yellow page, you'll find early Head Start attendance and meal counts. That's another piece to that reporting requirement. And this isn't as interesting perhaps as the child outcomes, but it is a requirement, and I just want to ensure that you are understanding what you see when you look at this report. The numbers across, it's a different way of presenting things that you're just learning all of the children present on the Mondays of the month and Tuesdays of the month and Wednesdays of the month, so on. In any month, you would be looking at, well, how many Mondays were there in that month? And in August, we had children in attendance on only 3 Mondays of August because we were closed for in-service on the 4th week of the month. And so, or the last week of the month, let me put it that way. So there were only 3 Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays for children to attend in the month. And then in August, there were 4 Thursdays and 4 Fridays. So in peeling back the onion on the attendance and the meal counts, there's those kinds of things that you might want to check with the actual calendar to observe how many days of each day of the week are there in the month. The other point I want to make is this is an August report. Not all of our classrooms are in operation during August, only our full day, full year classrooms for Head Start children or early Head Start children. And so once you start receiving September forward, you'll see a dramatic increase in the number of children in the attendance days and in the meal counts. Third thing I want to point out to you is the designation here in the left column, participant meals, full reimbursement. Those are the meals we serve to children. So you can see the numbers across the board there for the morning snack if we're serving one, which we don't, lunch, afternoon snack, and we don't serve supper either. We do serve breakfast. I missed that one. Non-participant CACFP, Child and Adult Care Food Program meals, those are meals that are eaten by the staff. We are required to have staff eating with the children, but we are not paid for those. So those staff are non-participants, but we are saying those are CACFP meals. Then the last category there is non-participant, so we know that's adults. Non-CACFP meals, those are days that perhaps we have invited families to have lunch with their children. We may have the Lincoln's Challenge cadets in the classroom and eating with the children, or other volunteers that may have stopped that day and are eating with the children. So that's what those designations are then in your far left column. So you can read through that report more carefully for yourself than for both Head Start, and then on the back page you'll see Early Head Start. So again, that's a required report, and I wanted to make sure that you understand what you're seeing when you see that. All right, I'm going to move along then to our performance, our program information report, which is also an annual report. And on that report, you have a summary report here in these 5 pages. The full report in all of its glorious detail is on the website, but I want to highlight a few percentages here for you. On the first page, the percent of children with a medical home in Head Start, 99.6% of the children left the program having a medical home. And we know that is a key factor in children being ready for school, in that they are healthy, they have had a physical exam, they've had all of their immunizations, they've had vision and hearing screening, they've had a lead screening, and hemoglobin screening. Up to date with immunizations, 97.6%, and children with a dental home. Another key factor in children's health is their dental care, and fortunately, because we have a partnership with Smile Healthy, all of our children and their immediate family members are receiving dental care from Smile Healthy, who are not able to access it if they are not able to access it elsewhere in the community. If you'll turn the page then, again for Head Start, children up to date on preventive care, 92.7%. And children receiving professional dental exams, 91.4%, and children receiving treatment, 95.7%. And I will point out that our percentages here are higher than the state or the national percentages. So I'm really proud of that. Then you have some other key performance indicators in regard to family services, but I'll let you read that at your leisure. We do have on page 3 requirements for our Head Start teachers, that at least half of the teachers in our program must have at least a 4-year degree. We are at 56.7%, as you can see there. And then any of our other teachers do have at least an associate degree in early childhood. And then we do have a statistic there on the number of teacher aides who are working on at least a CDA, or perhaps they're enrolled in school for a degree. And that's at about 34%. Then the last 2 pages are about early Head Start. Now, early Head Start, because we are working with children, infants, toddlers, and 2-year-olds, our percentage on children who are up to date for EPSDT, that's early, it's a state acronym for a schedule developed on all of the health requirements for children, is only 77.7%. And that is because of the high frequency of the well-child visits and immunization schedule for infants and toddlers. Whereas Head Start children, it's once a year. This is depending on the child's age. Children are going monthly for a period of time in their early life, and then the time period does extend out. But it's very difficult to keep up with every child in early Head Start to ensure that those were right on time. Another factor for both Head Start and early Head Start health requirements is many of our children are on Medicaid, and Medicaid will not allow us to take children in for their exams or whatever immunization is needed next prior to the 366th day after the last annual visit. So we're already out of compliance by the time we get there because of the Medicaid rule that we can't go early. So in order to ensure that we're on time for this report. I will point out to you then at the bottom of the page, 100% of our infant and toddler classroom teachers do meet the requirements of at least a CDA, which is a Child Development Associate credential. It's an experience-based credential, or higher. And most of our early Head Start teachers do have at least an associate degree in early childhood. So again, that's a recap of some key statistics from our annual program information report. So Patsy requested that I would maybe hit some highlights or lowlights, if you will, in regard to sequestration and perhaps shutdown. Well, just off the top, the shutdown of the federal government is not affecting us at this time. We do see in the payment system that our funds from Head Start and Early Head Start are available through the end of February. So that is, as far as we know, any other things coming out unknown at this time, we do see that our funding is in the system. In regard to sequestration, which actually took effect March 1, and by the time we were able to put together our proposal for reducing our funds, we did have to reduce our funds by about $260,000. It was, and we did time it that our implementation would start in June. So we did close our Part Day classrooms 1 week early this last school year, and we did reduce our enrollment, as I talked about earlier, 20 children in Head Start and 24 children in Early Head Start this year no longer receive services. We did that primarily through attrition as we were needing to replace enrollment over the summer. Those 44 enrollments we no longer fill. And that will be another 44 enrollments as far as we know, another 44 enrollments in the coming year and following. As far as we can see, that this is a permanent reduction to our funding. 62 staff were affected by the sequestration in a reduction in hours. of one kind or another. And we actually eliminated, let me see just here, we eliminated 6 teaching staff and 1 home-based position. There were also a couple of administrative office positions that were vacant, and we did not fill those. And so over the range of all of the cutbacks to hours and positions, 62 positions were affected. So do you have any questions then in regard to what I've presented this evening, or?
Max, do you still have your question? Okay. Anyone? Diane?
I just wanted to say that working with Kathleen on the Policy Council, she's a wealth of information, and she's always been very open. So if anybody has any questions, please make sure you talk to her, or stop by and see all the little kiddos. It's amazing what they do, and how quick they were to react to cutting back on those funds when they needed to do it in advance. So Kathleen, you do a great job. I want everybody here to know that.
Thanks, Diane. I appreciate that. Coming from you, your leadership at the Policy Council has been so good for the whole council and our parents to learn from you. Thank you. All right.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Lloyd. Good to see you too. Everyone, please come to one of our sites at any time. Just let us know.
Okay. Can we have a request to accept the report?
Motion to accept all monthly reports.
Lorraine, second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
If there's no other business, we'll move ahead. Policies, appointments, and procedures, Mr. Quisenberry.
Thank you, John. Okay, for this evening, for policy, personnel, and appointments, the first appointment is item A1, the nomination of Robert Kettner for the Penfield Water District for a term ending 5/31/2018. Mr. Chair, if you, in your substitute role, if you would make that motion.
The chair moves Robert Kettner.
Seconded by Mr. J. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. That passes unanimously. Next up is the appointment for the Deputy Sheriff Merit Commission.
Chair appoints John Rector.
Second by Mr. Mitchell. Any discussion or questions? Yes, Patsy.
I don't see any application, just a letter of recommendation here. Is there?
The sheriff makes the appointment for the Merit Commission,
So
or makes the recommendation for the appointment,
I see. Thank you very much.
and it's his responsibility to do that. Any further questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Also passing unanimously. Moving on, the item here for the County Board of Health, I talked to Deb a little bit earlier, and although we believe that there is no substantial changes in this renewal of this agreement, which had expired, we don't have anybody on hand who can speak to that with detail. So I would ask that you ask for a motion to pass this to the full board without recommendation, and in the meantime, we'll have Mr. DeThorne provide us with any substantial changes. We don't believe there are any, but he's been working on this and he could provide that. Have that motion by Mr. Langenheim, seconded by Mr. Hartke. Any discussion? Ms. Petrie?
I do have a question of clarification. is it etched in stone that this has to be a 5-year agreement?
I don't believe so. You do? Okay, yes, we'll ask Mr. DeThorne if there's any statutory requirement for the length of the agreement.
I would appreciate that very much because I would like it to be 3 years instead of 5.
Okay. Any further questions? So to pass this to the full board without recommendation, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. All right, that passes unanimously. You have in your packet the report from the county clerk, who is not with us tonight, so if you have any questions, I'm sorry. I'd entertain a motion to accept and place on file. Mr. Esri, second by Mr. James. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed, say nay. Okay, next, we have the report of the county administrator. Deb, do you have anything you'd like to point out?
Not really.
All right, so I would entertain a motion to accept and place on file. Mr. James is moving, Mr. Hartke seconding. That's how I'm seeing it. Any discussion or questions for Deb? Ms. Petrie?
Well, I just want to put on the record an observation of these reports that I notice quite often than not, there are people connected with the nursing home who are in the unemployment report and filing for unemployment. And that I find sometime it might be interesting to find out why this happens with so much regularity.
Deb, do you have any insight into that?
The nursing home experiences a good amount of turnover, and many times employees who aren't even eligible for unemployment apply for unemployment and end up not receiving it. So I think that's historically been true, and it probably is the largest area in county government where there is that rate of turnover.
All right, any further questions or discussion? All in favor of accepting and placing on file, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. The motion passes unanimously. Next item is a recommendation for fiscal year 2014 self-funded insurance for property and liability and workers' compensation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Alex, seconded by Mr. Rosales. And Deb, do you have any comments to add before we
Well, I would
go
point
into
out
discussion?
that the summary of the plans is on page 69. Overall, this represents a total 5.17% premium increase, which is very good in today's market. And I would also point out that our broker, Molly Rawlings from Diamond Brothers, is here. If you have any specific questions with regard to any of the coverages, I'm sure that she could help you with that.
All right, Molly, go ahead and have a seat just in case. And your microphone is already on, but I'd ask you to speak into it if we have questions. Mr. Alex?
I'm not sure who this is a question for, but I wanted to ask about Ilias's property coverage. I assume they carry their own insurance on their property, because I see we have no contents.
Yeah, Ilias does have their own property insurance. It's through State Auto for the contents. The building is carried on the county master policy, but other than that, everything else is insured by Ilias separately.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. James?
On your notes, I noticed the nursing home has increased due to servicing time. Could you explain that to me?
Yes, that was brought to our attention. On average, ICRMT schedules 60 to 80 hours of service for a county as a whole. The nursing home over the past 3 years is averaging 250 hours of servicing. And so this year, they came to us and said, we need to charge a greater fee for that to make sure all county services stay at the level that we've gotten them to. And in discussion with Deb, we felt that was the best way to go because we've actually had a very, very significant reduction in claims and reports from the nursing home. We were over 300 reports a year. Some led to claims 3 years ago, and as of last week, when I got these numbers, we were only at 68 reports in this year. So we've had a very good experience with them coming in early and being able to make the phone calls and having people come out if they have questions or situations they want to run by ICRMT to know how to handle those properly and legally. And so we increased the hours to 300 hours so that not only the nursing home, but the county as a whole, including the sheriff's department and everybody, can still use those services without having to charge extra fees through the year.
Thank you.
All right, any further questions, discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Okay. That motion passes, but not unanimously. Okay, and next, we have a resolution honoring our county employees for their extended service. I'd entertain a motion for that resolution for the full board. Mr. Mitchell moved it. Lorraine seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. And next, we have a resolution recognizing our retiring employees. Have a motion, Mr. McGuire, seconded by Mr. Rosales. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Also unanimous. Okay, that is all of the items for policy. For consent agenda, I have 1 and 2, and 3 and 4. D3 and 4, sorry, A1 and 2 and D3 and 4.
But we probably want those on the regular agenda to read them out
Okay,
loud.
okay, so just A1 and 2 for consent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda, finance. Mr. Alex, please.
We only have one pen in District 10, so I gotta get it back from James. All right, good evening. Our first item on the finance agenda is, comes to us from the Citizens Committee for the Restoration of the Clock and Bell Tower at the Champaign County Courthouse. I would ask for an omnibus motion to recommend the transfer agreement between the Community Foundation, the Champaign County Board, and the Citizens Committee, and the non-endowed fund agreement between the County Board and the Community Foundation be forwarded to the full board with a recommendation
So
for
moved.
approval. Moved by Mr. Quisenberry and Ms. Michaels. Is there any discussion or questions about this item? Mr. Carter.
This kind of, I'm just wondering why, when we have things happening to the building, that we don't have insurance to pay it.
Mr. Carter, in this particular case, this is a woman who passed away and in her estate wanted to leave money to the county to maintain the bell tower and specifically the clock. So this is an agreement that essentially allows her to contribute that money to the Community Foundation, which will then hold that money until the county needs it and can justify the need for it. So this doesn't really have anything to do with the building or repairs on the building at this point. It's just allowing her to donate this money so that it can be used to maintain the clock or the bell tower in the future.
But we do have insurance on the building, right?
I'll ask Ms. Busey to address the insurance situation.
Yes, we have insurance. As a matter of fact, you approved the insurance renewals for next year.
Mr. Quisenberry.
I just want to point out that the county is fortunate to have a citizen who was interested in preserving this clock and this bell tower. The clock is a very interesting mechanical instrument and had for some time been neglected and is now in working order. So we are fortunate that a private citizen has looked forward into the future and said, I want to make sure that what happened before, which was about, 50 years of neglect, happens again, just on the basis of finances. I'm supportive of this mechanism to respect that person's will, because otherwise I don't think we could take the money unless we took the steps to ensure that her wishes were recognized. And it also provides a mechanism for when we know we need something, we have a path to go get the money from the East Central Illinois Community Foundation to fund any changes that we need, or updates or repairs we need to do. So I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Langenheim. Thank you, Mr. Langenheim. Ms. Bergson.
Instead of, just saying over and over this woman, it's Elva Greason. I think we can say her name when she's given us that much.
I agree, Astrid. Thank you. The county expresses its appreciation both to Ms. Elva Greason and to the Community Foundation for both giving us the money and working with us to hold it. Are there did I see any other hands up? Seeing none, all those in favor of moving both of these to the full board with a recommendation for approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Our next item, now we'll go to the nursing home. Mr. Maxwell sent a memo out to the county board via email. We have Mr. Gima here to discuss a couple items with us today. The first is an ordinance authorizing a loan to the Champaign County Nursing Home from a bank or financial institution. I would ask for a motion to send that to the full board with a recommendation for approval. I see Mr. Harkey and Mr. Mitchell, and I'll give the floor to Mr. Gima now.
In past years, we have issued, or the county has issued a tax anticipation warrant I believe in early December, borrowing against the property taxes for the nursing home to aid in cash flow. So this year, I guess a couple of months ago, Deb informed me that the General Assembly of the state passed legislation that allowed to allow counties to obtain bank loans, which now gives us another option from tax anticipation notes. And one of the benefits is that we can borrow that money a little bit earlier. So we typically borrow it in the same fiscal year, which would be 2014. And I asked Deb, made a request if we could borrow it a couple of weeks earlier in November. The reasons are basically because of the federal government shutdown. I have seen conflicting information from my trade associations on whether the shutdown will have any impact on Medicare and Medicaid payments to all healthcare providers. I see stories that says, nope, no problems, and I'm seeing other stories that says we don't know, and it's possible. I've seen the same thing with Social Security checks. So I'd rather be pragmatic and conservative and to make sure that we have adequate cash. And again, the worst case scenario would be if we did not receive a Medicaid and a Medicare payment in the month of November. And November is just a little bit different because it is a 3 payroll month. If we receive those payments even a few days or a couple of weeks later in the month, we're okay. But if those payments happen to go in December, we will start to look a little short by the end of the month. So if I can move up the borrowing by a couple of weeks, I'll have cushion in the event that there is a payment slowdown by Medicare and Medicaid. Now, in terms of the borrowing, in previous years, we have always borrowed $900,000, or roughly I think it's 90% of the taxes. We are not borrowing anything additional. All we're doing is moving it up by a couple of weeks. In past years, we basically have spent that $900,000 before we received it. Last year was probably the first year where it was just providing us a cushion for our cash flow for the entire fiscal year. The same thing is going to occur this year, except I just want to get it a couple of weeks sooner than we've had last year. Questions?
Mr. James.
Well, we're out on tax anticipation warrants for this whole year, correct? 2012, we approved them for 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now you're asking to go out and get a loan this November? Am I understanding that right, or next November?
This November.
So the tax anticipation warrants are going to be paying off debt that is coming in now, and then you're going to increase your debt load by getting another loan. And in your question or your request here, how do we know what that interest rate is going to be at, and what collateral, if some of these anticipation warrants coming in, other than 2014 if we don't extend it out, how are you going to offset that? I mean, to me, it seems like we're taking bad money to go after bad money. And when we started this tax anticipation warrant, I want to remind this board that we always go out a year ahead to pay the bills from the previous year when we're raking that in. And I have a big problem with this because from what I'm hearing you say, that if these payments don't come in, you're borrowing this money, and if you run short, is general corporate going to have to pay it? Because let's face it, the nursing home won't have it.
Scott,
We are
I see Deb's been shaking her head here. I'm going to give her a chance to jump in, and then we'll go to you.
Well, the tax anticipation warrants that you issued this year have already been paid off with this year's property taxes. We are not going to issue tax anticipation warrants again if you approve this loan. This loan is a vehicle to use instead of tax anticipation warrants, and we believe that this will be a less costly avenue for the board to use because tax anticipation warrants are more like bonds, requires involvement of bond counsel. This is a loan that can effectively be, the treasurer is already prepared an RFP to release to the banks and can effectively be negotiated between the county and the bank who comes up with the best interest rate for that loan. And what we're guaranteeing is that the loan will ultimately be repaid with the property taxes to be collected in 2014 that are the nursing home's property taxes. The legislation allows this loan to extend for as long as 2 years. You're being asked to approve an ordinance that would say it would be repaid by the end of October in 2014 because you're going to utilize the property tax receipts to the nursing home to repay this loan.
Okay, but you're saying you're thinking the interest rate will be better. No one knows at this point.
Right, but I think that is the treasurer's best opinion as well, that there should be really no difference in the interest rate. And because it's less cumbersome, it's possible you might get more banks responding to a request for a simple loan than for tax anticipation warrants. And Dan, feel free to jump in if I'm misspeaking.
Well, and if I may, a follow-up, so are you talking about going out and borrowing in increments as you need it, or borrowing it all at once and then using it to pay bills as they come in?
All at once.
All at once. So you're, and how much are you talking about borrowing?
900,000.
900,000. And you're saying that the banks were hopeful that the banks, and I'm just trying to clear this up in my head, that these taxes that are going to come in is going to be your collateral.
Yes. So it's replacing, so we're not issuing a tax anticipation warrant in December plus the loan. The loan will replace the tax anticipation warrant. The cost of issuance should be lower because we won't require bond counsel as we do with the tax anticipation warrant. And we're hopeful that the interest rate will be as competitive as it was last year, which I believe it was less than 1%. And we're borrowing the same month over the same time period.
And I guess I would just add that when we were looking at revenue anticipation bonds, I guess the big fear there was, and it would still be a fear in my mind, that if for whatever reason we can't make the deadline on the note, is general corporate in any way going to have to back that up?
Ultimately, any loan, according to the statutory requirements, would be ultimately the responsibility of the county, which means the general fund. However, when you were looking at revenue anticipation notes, you were looking at payments from the state as the revenue that was backing this. There has never been a question about the fact that property tax receipts would come in and be able to pay off a loan. This will be the 6th year that the nursing home has done this. For 5 years, we've done tax anticipation warrants, and they have all been completely paid off each year through the property tax receipts. This is, this is just what we view to be a better tool for that loan for the nursing home.
And one last question, and I'll stop. When do we ever think we're going to be out of the hole to where we don't have to borrow on next year's income?
I hope it's sooner than later. I can't give you a timetable, but we are much better off today than we were back in 2011 when we needed that tax anticipation warrant funds to get caught up on our payables. We are caught up on our payables. The main thing is if we can generate cash from operations to help build up our cash balance. So
If this wouldn't go through, you would still need tax anticipation warrants, correct? For next year, if this doesn't get approved? I mean, what you just said to me is that we're better off, but if we don't approve, I know it's in lieu of, but I guess I want to make sure that what we're saying here is just another loan, whether it be tax anticipation warrants or this, it is a loan to the nursing home to continue its operations.
I'd say we're at the point where it would be tight, but it's very possible that I could maintain enough cash to pay all the bills without the loan, but in any given month, it's going to be tight. This just gives us that added cushion. And also keep in mind that we still have the other variable of how the state is going to act with its Medicaid payments. So if they delay their payments, they've already delayed their payments by 25 days last month. Now, we're hearing that at this point, they don't anticipate that it will get to a longer period of time. But again, there's no guarantee. And we had absolutely no heads up that they were going to do this. So, and we can weather that very easily. But I think long-term wise, there is no guarantee that the state will continue to make regular monthly payments. We can handle regular monthly payments, whether it's 60 or 90 days or even longer out. But we have to have the assurance from the state that we're going to receive regular monthly payments. So borrowing against the property taxes gives us that cash cushion so that we can handle some of those fluctuations in our cash flow from the state. So that is the big variable that would determine whether we can ever get to the point where we won't have to borrow against the property taxes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. Can you turn your microphone off? Mr. Jay, I believe, was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With no disrespect to anybody involved in this, I'd certainly like to hear from the treasurer.
Mr. Welch? While he's coming up over here, who had their hand up on the right side of the table? I saw you, Pat. I've got you and you two. I saw Patsy and Josh, Jim. Not you, Patsy and Jim. Okay. And Diane. Thank you.
You know, tax anticipation warrants, as we've been talking about, we've done 5 years of them. I brought some statistics tonight. Let me give you an idea a little bit about the history of it first, okay? Back in 2009 was the first year we did these, and for each year of the 5 years, I'll give you the amount that we borrowed, the amount that it cost us, and what the interest rate was. Back in 2009, we borrowed $780,000. The interest rate was 3.2%, and we paid $15,519.86 in interest. 2010, $780,000 again. 1.0 was the interest rate, and the interest was $4,542.37. 2011, the principal borrowing was $856,415. Rate was 1.2%. Tell me if you need me to slow down a little bit. Okay. And the interest was $6,414.48. We go to 2012. We borrowed $878,417, interest rate of 1.12. $5,636.78 was the amount of interest that we paid. In 2013, which I just paid off September 20th, $914,000 even, interest rate of 0.75, and we paid $4,252 in interest. For a total of over those 5 years, interest paid out was $36,365.49. Now, when we talk about the new law, I must admit, when I heard about the new law, I thought it was a solution for the RANs, the Revenue Anticipation Notes, versus the Tax Anticipation Notes, because really the Tax Anticipation Notes have really worked fine. But there is a question about whether if you don't have bond counsel and the rates could continue to stay low, that you might save some money going this route. And I'm also of the opinion that if we put out bids for the loan as it is now in the law, and the rates came in higher, because it's possible that just a regular straight loan could be higher from an interest rate standpoint. There's nothing precluding us from going back and doing tax anticipation warrants as well. So I think it's still a win-win. But I'm intrigued by the new law. But as I say, my initial reaction was, well, that's a good solution potentially if we have to worry about the RAN. Because revenue anticipation, of course, as we found, the banks weren't really interested in covering the state's problem of payments. And it gives you a 2-year window. So I think there's a lot of good things here. I think when we first started having meetings about the revenue anticipation notes, I couldn't find one county that had ever done one. Still can't find one that's ever done one. And I must admit that my first reaction was change the legislation. There's a reason that the RANs aren't being used, is because they're too hard to get. You've got to get a promise from the state. Well, the state doesn't want to tell you that they're going to owe it to you. I mean, we all know they do, but they're not going to actually put it in writing that, yeah, we owe you this money back. So we looked at a lot of different options within a RAN. And I just always thought that the best logical way to go was to change the legislation, making it easier to borrow. That's what this has done. So I must admit, I didn't really think in terms of tax anticipation revenue warrants when I first saw the legislation. I thought the RAN. So I'll be glad to answer any questions, but that's really my feeling about it. I don't see if there's any downside here. In fact, it could be a good side, but let's admit, though, the rate of 0.75 this year is very, very good. And you do question whether a straight loan would be higher. We just don't know until we try. But I'd like to have, you can't complain that you got two options, because we've only had one option coming up until now.
I'm just going to jump in and ask you to
Sure,
clarify
I'm
what you
sorry.
just said. Does this new law also, would we also be able to use this new law to borrow money secured by revenues, assuming a bank was willing to loan us money on those terms?
I think so.
So
Yeah,
this sort of covers both.
That's my belief,
This would
yes.
cover both the tax anticipation and the revenue anticipation, but in this case, the
Yeah.
request is to collateralize the loan with property tax.
It's just process is changing here. Tax anticipation warrants, just take the name off and put a straight loan. That's the only thing that's happening here. We're still guaranteeing it by the property taxes. We're still paying it off as the property taxes come in.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Ms. Schwartz.
I know we're not going to change it, but to Mr. James and to everybody else, I just want to remind the board that in 2010, the county dumped on the nursing home a construction bond of $4 million that doesn't belong to the nursing home, and they've been paying it since. And if they've been paying over $300,000 a year, and in the 4 years since, if they would be paying that, we wouldn't be having to talk about $900,000, because they would have more than $1.2 million in their pocket, and so on. So I know we're not going to change it. I know at the time General Corp really needed the money. I'm not sure we actually need it now as desperately, but since this seems to be the status quo, we'll leave it there. But to suggest that this is the nursing home that created the problem, I think is not correct.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz. Mr. Quisenberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, this county, because many of our operations are funded by property tax, which only comes in twice a year, we have to borrow. Fortunately, in the general fund, we borrow from ourselves, so it's a good deal. And I'm not sure that we're interested in doing that option, but from what the treasurer is saying, I'm hearing that we have a new option, that we can borrow the same amount of money in a simpler mechanism, which might be cheaper, and if it doesn't work out, we can go back to the old method a month later. I can't imagine why we wouldn't want to do this. Thank you.
Ms. Petrie's next.
Okay, I'd like to focus on,
I'm sorry, Mr. Carter? I'm sorry, I did not see you. If you think it's your turn,
it's
I'll let
okay,
you go.
let him go.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. However you want to work it out. I write down the hands as I see them, and I apparently missed you. Sorry, Mr. Carter. Do you want to speak? Ms. Petrie's next, if you don't want to go, Lloyd.
Okay.
Ms. Petrie?
Okay, I want to focus on logistics. My question to Mr. Gima is, you've given us no explanation of why the number is 900,000. I need to better understand why it's that figure.
It was just determined that instead of borrowing the full amount of the property taxes, that we would borrow roughly the same amount that we borrowed in the previous year. So it's actually a little bit, we actually borrowed 914,000. So we're actually borrowing less this year than we did last year.
Okay. Logistic questions to Dan. Did I hear you say that the interest rate might be 0.75? Is that correct?
It is this year.
It is.
It is this year, yes.
It is this year.
Yeah, the lowest of the 5 years.
Okay. Oh, it was 0.75, not 1.75.
No, I'm sorry,
Okay,
0.75 this year.
I made a mistake writing it down. What do you anticipate the interest rate right now to be?
I have no idea. And that's the issue we're talking about here. I think, a bank might look at a straight loan a little differently than they would a tax anticipation warrant. And I don't know that for a fact, but we won't know till we try.
Okay.
So I really don't, it strikes me that the rate would be higher, but I don't know that until we've tried it.
Okay, where I'm trying to go with my logistic questions are, I haven't read that Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security are in jeopardy during this time of the government closing down. So I'm more interested in figuring out the best logistic time to put this into effect. That's number one. Number two, Mr. James sort of alluded to this, but never got answered, and that is it in the best interest of the situation to borrow the whole amount at one time, or is it strategically more advantageous to split it up into half and half, or whatever amounts in relationship to what it'll end up costing the county in the way of interest and flexibility for use of the monies?
If you don't mind, it seems to me that they need the entire amount up front. And there's a reason we've done that. When you talk about tax anticipation warrants, what usually happens is there are two warrants issued, one that's due in July, one that's due in September. But that doesn't mean that the money wasn't used. It was used up front, in fact. So I think it's a cash flow issue more than anything else, unless I'm speaking out of turn. But it seems to me that there's no real, we're not talking about a letter of credit or a line of credit. We're talking about a loan that they need the upfront money, and I think it makes a lot of sense to do it this way.
Is that it, Ms. Petrie? Are you done? Okay, thank you. Mr. McGuire, I think you're next if you, okay. Do you want me to come back to you? Okay. Ms. Michaels? I'm sorry, I thought you passed. You? No, Lloyd. Go for it.
How long the building been built? 10 years?
Is it 10 years? Okay, Deb's telling me it's 10 years.
I thought so. I'm trying to figure out, you haven't showed any profit in 10 years. It's kind of bad to me. Now, you don't have no real estate payment, right? We paid for the building. Is that correct? Huh? Yes, we did too.
They're paying.
The county, the taxpayers are paying for the initial $20 million for the facility through a property tax every year. The additional $4 million is paid for by the nursing home. That was as a result of construction issues. And Mr. Carter, we moved into the building in 2007. I'm sorry, the project started a little over 10 years ago. The nursing home actually moved into the facility in 2007.
So, well, we paid all the contractors, right? We don't have any debt for that. Okay, so, I'm a small business person myself, not I swear. I never got that kind of deal that I see getting. This is unusual, but you're using, what you're using for collateral? You tax or something?
Property taxes.
It's the property taxes.
So you and your tax, supposedly, that the tax come, that's what you're using?
Yes.
Boy, I don't know. But anyway, well, how much you owe us on the loan that I know, because I voted on it? How much you owe on that?
Are you talking about the construction
The
bond,
previous
Lloyd?
loan that we let them have, yeah.
There is no outstanding loan from the general corporate fund. to the
They paid
nursing
it
home.
off?
It was, we declared it paid off, yes.
They paid it off?
We decided that it had been paid by them taking on the construction debt, yes. The answer is yes. I don't know how many other ways I can say it. Yes. There is no loan outstanding between the county, the general corporate fund and the nursing home at this point.
Well, that's good news, if that's factual.
I'm not lying to you, Mr. Carter. That's factual and it is good news.
So, okay. All right. I guess I go along with the program.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Let's go to Ms. Michaels.
Okay. I can appreciate having two avenues. I think it's good, and I think it's really nice to have something to maybe compare what our status quo has been all along. So I am in favor of going forward and doing RFPs to see what we can get. However, I'm concerned about what the difference would be. What is the point break, if you will, the percentage break, if you will, where it is cost advantageous to do it one way versus the other, and I would be very careful with that. To me, it seems like I've always been told the bank's like a 1-point spread in this point. I don't know. With it being a new law and whatnot, there could be document and application fees that maybe wouldn't be in future years. And then also, the other thing that I'm also not concerned about, but a comment is that generally also there's a little more collateral than what the loan amount is anyway. And I would think that there would be enough taxes there that if we needed to pledge 1 1/4, 1/10, that we'd be fine on that. Okay. So.
Right, in any of these years, including the year that we're talking about going forward, there's always an increment between what the amount of taxes coming in, what we're retroactive borrowing.
Right. Okay. That's it.
Thank you. Let's go to Ms. Berkson.
The numbers that you reported paying as interest on the tax anticipation warrants, are those the total costs?
I'm sorry?
Are those the total costs that you paid for those? In other words,
From an interest standpoint, but.
yeah, but
you know,
what are there other costs?
Well,
That's what
we
I'm
use
at.
bond counsel. I mean, I don't know what the actual cost was of the bond counsel, but
Any idea?
I have no idea.
Deb, do you have any idea?
I do not have that information. We could probably obtain it, but I don't have it here tonight.
Well, they don't know yet. Are there other costs for the loans?
No, there's no other loan fees or anything like that. The bond counsel is the only other variable that I'm not aware of, the actual number.
Thank you.
I'm going to Stan James.
I guess reading the ordinance, because I always, as long as I've said here, every time when something is passed and we go back to revisit it, I'm told, well, it's in the ordinance, you passed it, here it is. So if we could add some language in there that would clarify that under the county board, let's see, provides that the county board of a county may borrow money from a qualified institution, provided the money shall be repaid within 2 years, but somehow I'd like to see, well, it says within 2 years, that we have language in there that states that the nursing home or whoever's borrowing this money can't borrow it unless it is shown to the county board that the rates of interest are lower than using the tax anticipation bonds, somewhere in that ordinance. Because basically, we're giving them the authority to go out and borrow money.
Right.
And I'm not saying they would if it was higher, but if that language isn't in there, and let's say it does come in at 50% more and they need the cash flow, or 0.5% more, who's to say? We gave them the authority, and they'll say, well, you gave us the authority. Hopefully, they wouldn't do that, but there's a lot of hopeful incidences out there that people do wrong.
Dan, do you and/or Deb want to speak to that process, how we might
Sure,
ensure
I mean,
that happens in the future?
I can assure you, I'm not going to go with the higher interest rate. I'm going to try to find the lowest. And as I say, I think I've got two avenues to do that. I think it'll be pretty easy to determine once we send out the RFP on the, what we're talking about right now on the new legislation. If the rates are coming in higher, we're going to know right away, and we don't have to really respond to any of that. We can go a different direction because the rates, as I say, in the last 4 years, haven't been above, 1.1, 1.2 is the highest. So yeah, I'm always going to be looking for the lowest rate. There's no question about that. There are things in the state law that allow up to two years and things like that. But if you look at the resolution itself, we're defining the time periods we're going to use. We're also defining the fact that we're going to be using the property tax as collateral, so to speak, to pay the thing back. So it doesn't matter to me how you do language, but I can assure you that I'm not going to go out there borrowing and couldn't care less what the rates are.
I didn't mean to direct that at anybody in particular,
No,
but
I
we
didn't-
read
I-
all the time.
Right.
Where good things go awry. We see it in state government, we saw it with Blagojevich, we see people borrow money, give money,
Sure.
and then we, the people, the taxpayers, are on the hook. And the
Right.
excuse is, well, your representatives passed it. So I'm just saying that the language would be in there, and I'm a firm believer that whoever does it, instead of everybody's feet being held to the fire, the person that signs that dotted line, they're the one held responsible.
And I personally feel like it's my responsibility to get the best rate.
Well, if I can
Nobody
jump-
else's, it's mine.
If I could jump in here, my understanding is this is a one-time thing. I mean, if we want to do this again next year, we got to pass a resolution, right? This isn't
Right.
this isn't something that they can lean on in
But
future
that was
years.
true of tax anticipation warrants as well.
Correct. This is always a one-off,
No,
one-shot
you
deal.
blame me if it doesn't go right.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to call the question.
I want to recognize Ms. Buse.
The only thing I would add is that procedurally, if the treasurer feels like the interest rates as a result of this ordinance are not as competitive as what he could do with the tax anticipation warrants, we would simply come back to you next month, ask you to rescind this ordinance and issue an ordinance issuing tax anticipation warrants.
Thank you. Before I recognize Mr. Quisenberry, did anybody else have their hand up who I missed? Be honest now. I think everybody's good. Okay, so I'll recognize Mr. Quisenberry.
Just call the question.
There's a call for the question. Is there a second? There's a second to the call for the question. All in favor of ending debate, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Declare the question called. All those in favor of forwarding this to the full board with a recommendation for approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Aye. I'll declare that passed. Okay, the next item on the agenda, don't go away, Scott, is two budget amendments. These are essentially split up into two budget amendments just for clerical reasons. I would like to treat them as one, and I would ask somebody to make an omnibus motion covering items 2 and 3. That's Budget Amendment 13-00010 and -00011 for a total of $1,062,374. On behalf of the nursing home, I would ask for a motion. Mr. Maxwell, and I think I heard Mr. Langenheim next, sorry. Discussion. Let's give it to Mr. Gima first.
In 2012, the last 2 months of invoices for the month of October and November totaled approximately $1 million, were actually not paid until fiscal year 2013. So on an accrual basis, those expenses were in fiscal year 2012's income statement, both at the nursing home and on the county books. But because they were not paid until fiscal year 2013, which is basically in December of 2012 and January of 2013, this also reflects, at the time, the 30-day payment cycle that was in place at the nursing home. But because they were paid in fiscal year 2013, they were expensed against the fiscal year 2013 budget appropriations. So as we get to the end, towards the end of fiscal year 2013, we had appropriated at the beginning of the year in the budget $15 million. We are actually going to expense or pay approximately $16 million in invoices. So we need the budget appropriation so we can process all expenses that will be incurred in fiscal year 2013, plus the bills totaling $1 million that were incurred in 2012, but were actually paid in fiscal year 2013. So I want to emphasize that the nursing home is not spending $1 million more in 2013 against its 2013 budget. But it's to take care of the processing of all of our claims that are being paid in 2013.
Any questions for Mr. Gima or discussion from board members? Ms. Petrie?
With the chair's permission, could the auditor come up?
Feel like coming up?
My question is based on the assumption that your office has reviewed this proposal. Do you have any concerns?
I think Scott's memo explains it fairly well. The easiest way for me to explain it to you, and this is, it's a lot of things that are on paper that if you're not dealing with the system and entering in the bills when they come in, payments and revenue when they come in, and things that need to go out, it's going to be over your head. So I'm going to try to do my best. But basically, when we open our books on December 1st, the nursing home is 2 months behind because those 2 months have to be paid out of the next year's budget. Their bills don't come in. Things are already 30 to 60 days behind. So basically what we're showing is 14 months of bills on their 12 months of revenue. And this is going to happen every year unless you do this amendment, which then will get everything on paper and in the system even and where it should be, and then they'll actually be paying their bills out of the current year. Exactly. The other thing is, we should have remedied some of this when you changed our fiscal year and you extended our end of the year closeout to 60 days. That should help alleviate this problem. So Scott and his financial team came to our office and said, how do we work through this? How do we fix this? There may have been things that could have been said or they could have presented to you, that MPA could have presented to you that might have made things look rosier. I mean, this is a big amount. And we said, no, you need to just go and say, this is what we need to get it fixed and fix it now. And so we agree with this.
Mr. James?
When you're saying the bills didn't come in, are you saying the vendor didn't send the bill, or was the nursing home holding the bill until such time they felt they could pay the bill?
I believe it's a combination of both.
And are some of these bills only 2 months old, or do they go back 5 to 6 months?
I've seen older bills. Sometimes Scott probably has a better idea on the day-to-day than I do.
Well, I would like to see a system in place to where when they receive those bills, and they should be sent on to the auditor, and if money's there, they should be paid, but they shouldn't be being held, because I'm sure we're accumulating late fees and or interest. Am I not correct?
At the time, we were incurring late fees, but currently, we have gotten our payables to the point where we are not incurring any late fees. So in general, back then, when we were talking about 60 days, there were some vendors that were being paid on a slower basis than 60 days. It's an average. So today, we are basically, I think everyone is at 60 days or less, because that gets all of the vendors, we're not paying any late fees with any of our vendors at the current time.
Well, I know some businesses that I've dealt with in the past. I know this is a grander scale by all means, but they would go so far in the hole on late fees and interest payments that they had to cut where necessary, and it usually was staff. And I hate to see that happening, because really, if you're borrowing money and you got money in the bank, sometimes I think paying those bills, because we had heard, I don't know how long ago, 6 months ago, there was one bill that we racked up close to $13,000 in interest on. And to me, if you're borrowing money and you're doing this, it really needs to be looked at and a handle gotten on it, because all that comes into play. I mean, I'd love a $13,000 bonus.
And I'd like to say the nursing home has improved on that greatly, and I left on your desks for later in the meeting the payments not following policy, which would include things like those interests, and you'll notice the nursing home is not on that list this month. They've done a very good job of trying to get things up to date.
Ms. Bergson?
I'd just like to point out that they're not getting paid on time either, courtesy of the state of Illinois and the federal government. We're deadbeats.
Very true. Mr. Harper.
Here comes my conservative side again. Let's see, a $900,000 deal, $1 million deal, and everybody says the contractor's paid all, but we have, what, approximately 15 million in bonds out on this thing? Which is the responsibility we should be holding to our taxpayers of this county. When's enough enough? I mean, if this thing seems like we're a year and a half behind on bills, and Astor just said, this state, they may not pay. I'm just, I'm dead set against all this crap. Sooner or later, it's got to stand on its own or send it down the road.
Thank you. Mr. Carter.
Mr. Harper, taxpayer paid the money up front. So I can't understand why we that far back on the bond. Taxpayer gave them the money because I went out and campaigned for it.
Okay, thank you. Just to reiterate, I mean, this is essentially a technical amendment to the budget, right? My understanding is the budget was for 12 months of expenses. 2 months worth of last year's bills came in late and got paid out of this year's budget. Therefore, we're out of money in this year, out of money, so to speak, in the budget lines to pay the bills for the rest of the year. So this is cleaning up the budget to reflect what actually happened. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Are there any other comments, questions? Mr. Jay.
I'm sorry, but I'm totally confused, but that's not unusual for me either. My question is, if we go through this process that you're talking about now, will we be on target and paid up at the end of this year, or will we take bills from this year on to next year?
With the ability to extend the fiscal year, the bills for 60 days instead of 30 days in previous years, potentially this would be the last year that this will occur. But I always hate this because I always have caveats. The caveat is what happens with the state Medicaid payments. Because if there is a delay in state Medicaid payments, in addition to the discussion of the revenue anticipation notes, the only other vehicle that the county home has to conserve cash is to slow down the paying of its payables. So if we have to do that again, then we will incur this again in future years. If we have to extend our payables from the current 60 days to 90 or 120 days. So.
Any additional comments, questions, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. I'm going to declare that a pass, and I'll go to the full board. Okay, we'll move on to the, we have the monthly financial report also from the nursing home, which is in our packet. And at this point is our opportunity to ask Mr. Maxwell or Mr. Hartke questions. If you guys have anything to say beyond what was in Mr. Maxwell's memo, we'd be glad to hear it. Seeing no questions or comments, I would ask that for a motion to receive and place on file the monthly financial report. I see Mr. Richards and Mr. Hartke. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. And we'll hand this over to the treasurer.
Thanks. My monthly report's on the website as usual. One thing I'd add to my report is a little update on real estate taxes. This year we're collecting $296 million. Last day to collect will be October 24th, and today we're about 98.7% collected, which is good. We've sent out certified notices, which we're required to do by law. 14th of October was the date that all publication of names had to be done in the various newspapers. We published in 6 different newspapers. So those things have all been done. As we've gone along the process this year, we've been ahead a little bit. When we sent out reminder cards after the second installment, we sent out 840 less than we had the previous year. When we sent out our certified notices, they were about 300 less than they were the previous year. So back to a level around 2004, I should say. So it's all good. Things are going well. As I say, the tax sale will be October 25th. It'll be in this room. You ought to come watch it sometime. It's very interesting, I guess. I would just ask that unless there's questions, I'd ask that my report be accepted and placed on file, please.
Moved by Mr. Hartke, seconded by Mr. James to accept and place the reports on file. Are there any questions for the treasurer? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I'll declare that passed. May I have an omnibus motion for items 2, 3, 4, and 5? That's 3 executions of a deed of conveyance and a cancellation of a certificate of purchase.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Jay and seconded by Mr. Hartke, I believe. It's fine, seconded by Mr. Langenheim. Any questions for the treasurer, or would you want to
Yeah,
give us any words
these
of
are
wisdom?
four situations, three of the same where in all 4 situations, the taxes were unpaid in a particular year. Went to a tax sale, no one purchased them at the tax sale. The redemption period expired. The county has the sales certificate, and so we have an actual sealed bid auction. In the first 3 instances here, they paid at least the minimum bid, and these 3 people are going to take these mobile homes into their own possession and get them back on the tax rolls. In the 4th case, the actual taxpayer themselves decided after a period of time that they would redeem and pay all the back taxes, get themselves caught back up, get the sales certificate canceled, and then they own the home again outright. So it's all 4 good outcomes.
Thank you. Are any questions for the treasurer on these issues? If not, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Why don't you stay there, and we'll bring the auditor up too. You can give us a show here. The next item is item D1. This is a resolution for a policy on establishing and verifying county bank accounts. And whichever one of you guys wants to take this, take it away.
Well, this resolution came out of a meeting that the treasurer and I had when we were discussing some accounts here at the county, and we, just in conversation, we realized that, there's a lot of accounts, some of which we are not privy to. Yet the treasurer's name is the person that's supposed to be in charge of all of these accounts. And we got to talking about different situations where there's a potential for some kind of fraud. And what could we do, some common sense things that this board could pass and could instruct us to do, and could instruct other county offices and departments to do in order to safeguard county funds. Most of these funds are small funds that have very specific purposes. For an example, in the county clerk's office, they collect back taxes. And those back taxes are kept separate from other funds, and then when people come in and redeem their taxes, the tax buyers are paid out of that fund, things like that. At the county jail, the commissary fund is used just for inmates' snacks and supplies and things. So what we're asking for basically is to be made aware of these accounts countywide, to have the ability to find out when people are going to open new accounts, and to tell the auditor's office every 2 years, go through and talk to every bank in the county and find out, are there new accounts in the name of Champaign County that have been opened, so that we make sure that we are aware of all of them. And very specifically, this happened in Dixon. This is how Rita Crundwell created an account that was just an abbreviation sent to the city of Dixon's address. She was the only person on it, and that's where she funneled tens of millions of dollars. We're not saying this is happening in Champaign County.
Good.
God, I hope it's not happening in Champaign County. But let's just nip this in the bud now and make sure that we're able to be as transparent as we can with tax money here in Champaign County, and fee money, I should say. So if there's questions, we'd be glad to try to answer.
Let me get a motion to forward this to full board with a recommendation for approval. Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Michaels. Now we'll open the floor for discussion and questions. Ms. Petrie, you go first.
Thank you. My curiosity is getting the best of me. How is it that there isn't something in state statute or whatever that would allow this huge crack in the signage sidewalk?
It's very descriptive of you. We're not interested in taking control of these accounts. But I know that the circuit clerk has money that I'm not signing off on. I know the county clerk does, I know the sheriff does. And one of the things that we've talked about is when we ask these departments to identify these accounts that we are not signers on, to give us the legal authority for them to have the account. Now, there may be legal authority, and I'm sure there probably is, but I'd like to see it. And that's one of the things that we're going to be asking.
Anybody else? Mr. Schrader?
Yeah, as I read your 4 bullet points, I call them bullet points, I'm kind of surprised that you don't have the authority to go in to these financial institutions and check on these accounts. It's just amazing, the lack of transparency. But I'm kind of curious have you talked to the banks themselves, those individuals and institutions that would be aware of your authority, and what kind of I guess, just a resolution from the county board of governing body to give you that authority? Is that all it's going to take for the institutions?
It's not unlike what you provide in terms of signature resolutions, facsimile resolutions. We provide those to banks as well, letting them know who is responsible for signing off on county checks. I think the resolution, would provide that oversight for us.
A very similar resolution was passed in Sangamon County about 18 months ago, and it's basically that same procedure.
Glad to know we're actually
I'll
talking.
admit I had the same question that you did.
Glad to know we're actually talking to other counties and identifying best practices. Anybody else? Seeing no further requests for comment, all those in favor of forwarding this to the full board with a recommendation for approval, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Thank you.
Thank
The
you.
auditor should stay, treasurer can go. We have the monthly report from the auditor. Any comments?
No real comments, just ask it be accepted and placed on file. I know Ms. Petrie asked me last week, she asked me a question, just like to point out on the nursing home fund, 74% collected, 74% expenditure. So, we keep hearing that they're about breaking even. They're about breaking even. So that would be the only highlight I'd have for you.
Thank you for remembering.
Sure.
Thank you, sir. May I have a motion to accept the auditor's report and place it on file? Mr. Hartke and Ms. Cowart. Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, sir. Next item is approval of a partial release of judgment, and Mr. Fletcher from the State's Attorney's Office is here to tell us about it. Can you turn your microphone on?
Excuse me. This is very similar to a partial release of judgment that was before the county board in 2012. As you will recall, the county holds a judgment against Bernard and Eduardo Ramos. Some property owned by them in the city of Champaign is being developed right now. This partial release of judgment would facilitate that development. The county would actually recover more under this agreement than we would if we foreclosed on the judgment, given the market value of the property and the other liens ahead of us in the queue on this property. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
In light of that explanation, would someone like to move that we send this to the full board with a recommendation for approval? I saw Mr. James and Mr. Carter. Are there any questions for Mr. Fletcher? Yes, sir, Mr. Mitchell.
How many parcels do the Ramos have in the county?
To be honest, I can't answer that question off the top of my head. I know they do still have several parcels, well over the remainder of our judgment, if that's your concern.
And so do you think that we'll need to release partially each and every one of those?
Well, these have been brought to the board because there have been specific development projects that have made it economically worthwhile for the developer to seek the partial release of judgment. So I don't know if we're going to be doing this on a parcel by parcel basis. At some point, if we're going to eat up the entire judgment by releasing them one by one, but I don't think we're anywhere near that now.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Ms. Petrie.
It's just an updated information question. Have we made any progress on Cherry Orchard? I always ask this question.
No, it's a fair question. The Cherry Orchards is divided into two parcels. The primary parcel has been foreclosed upon by the bank. I am trying to find out what their plan of action is. I've made quite a pest of myself to them. At some point, we need to explore other options, but I want to have a specific plan to bring to the board before we have that discussion.
Please continue making a pest yourself. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Is anyone opposed? That motion passes. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Send the bill to the county. Now we're moving on to budget amendments and transfers. Our first one is Budget Amendment 13-45 from the coroner, revenue neutral for $2,800. Could I have a motion to send this to the full board by Mr. Jay and Mr. Mitchell? Any comments, questions, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, that'll pass. Budget Amendment 13-00050. Information technology, increased appropriations of $52,000, increased revenue of $19,945. Copier expenses, may I have a motion? Moved by Mr. Esri, second. Somebody's got to be willing to second. Mr. Harper, are there any comments or questions? Any discussion? Ms. Petrie, and then Mr. Richards.
I just can't resist. All this technology seems to be costing us more and more money than really saving us money.
I'll let Ms. Busey speak to why the copier costs keep going up and the printing costs are going down.
You are paying for this Xerox copier services agreement out of the IT General Corporate Fund budget. Prior to this current contract, we had a number of departments who had printers that were paid for out of capital asset replacement, which is where we purchase technology. And we are seeing a declining expenditure base there, and it corresponds to the increase here. The other thing is, under this new contract, when we prepared the fiscal 2013 budget, the contract was still fairly new, and it's comprehensive to the entire county, and we were just off in assessing what the total contract cost was. We now know it, so the 2014 budget is accurately calculated.
I appreciate the explanation.
And the net effect is, I believe, $32,000. Mr. Richards, long night, sorry.
I understand we're consolidating this. What's the financial impact here? We're consolidating, are we seeing an increase overall in copier costs? Is it a wash, it's just altogether or decrease?
I would say the copier costs have increased with this current contract because we have eliminated so much in printers and printing costs. This includes this is an all-inclusive cost. It includes all maintenance, all supplies for the copiers. And this amount that we're spending this year will be very similar to what we actually spent last year, which we did not know when we prepared this year's budget, and with what is budgeted for next year. So it's fairly stable. It just reflects a large increase in the number of copiers and the utilization of those copiers that went into effect with this current contract. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing no hands, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. Now on Budget Amendment 13-51, $5,053 of increased costs from the fund balance to cover posting, advertising costs for the Deputy County Administrator for Finance and Facilities Director's position. May I have a motion? I saw Mr. Esri. May I have a second? Mr. Jay. Comments or questions or discussion? Ms. Michaels.
With this $5,000, it just says the cost of advertising. I mean, that just seemed like an awful lot. Was that part of hiring somebody to look too, or like a headhunter type thing?
No. The search committee, committees for both positions wanted us to reach out extensively and particularly try to reach groups that we wouldn't normally reach. So our normal advertising budget for positions includes advertising in the News Gazette only. For
Right.
both of these searches, we advertised in professional journals relevant to the positions. We advertised with the National Urban League. We advertised with forums for business professionals. And for each of those, the total cost of advertising was about $2,500 more than what we would normally do
Yeah, just
when advertising just in the News Gazette and locally.
Okay.
Thank you, Deb. Anybody else? Seeing no one, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? No. Thank you. That motion carries. On to Budget Amendment 13-52. This is revenue neutral, RPC, accepting money from Kankakee County to do a transportation study. May I have a motion? So moved. Mr. Langenheim, may I have a second? Ms. Bergson. Comments, questions, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? That motion carries. Moving on to Section H, item H1, Regional Planning Commission requesting approval of application if awarded acceptance of the 2014 Electronic Products Recycling Grant, moved by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Jay. Comments, questions, discussion?
There you go, Chris.
Yeah.
Chris,
Yes.
I would just say that I've attended one of them, and I really think that's an asset for our county. I really do.
Susan Monty is here. Feel like,
I want to congratulate Susan. It was a huge success. One reason I attended tonight was
I'm sorry, Susan, I didn't see you sitting back there. You're behind Mr. Harkey.
I didn't think there would be any question. So, thank you. This is a $2,000 grant with no local match. It's like a no-brainer. I mean, to apply for it, you get it, essentially to conduct outreach. It's not related specifically to the countywide residential electronics collection, but it's used to educate the public about all of the local options that exist for collection of electronics.
I think Ms. Petrie just wanted to congratulate you. Any other comments, questions for Ms. Monty? Discussion among board members? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Susan, for waiting. Moving on to Section I, this is from the county clerk, requesting approval of an acceptance agreement for the VAID 5 grant from the Illinois State Board of Elections. May I have a motion? Mr. Esri and Mr. McGuire. A discussion, questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. On to the county administrator, we have the budget report and budget change report.
The general corporate fund projection report, revenues continue to trend as they have been. So we are seeing better than anticipated performance in non-business licenses and permits, and that's directly attributable to revenue stamps reflected by real estate transactions. Under our state shared revenue, the corporate personal property replacement tax has come in well above budget, and that is year-to-date what we have received. It still could go higher. I'm just not sure how they're going to be keeping up in terms of monthly payments. The 1 cent sales tax is up. The quarter cent is basically very close to at budget. It is, at this point, 2.9% ahead of where it was last year. And the rest of those revenues remain stable. The income tax is also up fairly significantly over what was originally projected. In the bottom third of the page, as has been true for the last few months, general government, which is our fees and fines, are not performing at the level budgeted. But overall, we expect to see 102% of budgeted revenue in fiscal 2013. And corresponding expenditure, we are underspending and anticipate underspending in just about every area except purchase document stamps, which again corresponds to the real estate transactions, and medical and professional services looks like it will be a little ahead of budget. Overall, Looking at a projected variance, a positive variance of $407,580 on fiscal year 2013, which would end this fiscal year with a 14.3% fund balance.
Any comments or questions? Ms. Petrie?
Just a question on the document stamps. Have you identified why this difference is so great at this time of the budget year?
Because of real estate transactions, and they continue. And quite frankly, I talked to the recorder today, and she thinks she will not need the $870,000 that I'm projecting, but that is the projection that I get if I do a trend analysis at this point in the year over the last 10 years, so.
Thank you. Ms. Schwartz?
I think you answered it before, but I don't remember the answer. What do we expect the fund balances percentage to be at the end of next year? And what is the minimum required given our bonds? Because we're going to have a lower balance because we have a 13-month budget.
I think the projection at the end of December 2014 is that the fund balance, based on everything we know today and the budget as it's being presented tonight, will be right at 9.5%. But bond rating agencies would typically say that a fund balance goal of 10% is acceptable, and practically none of our bonds are paid out of the general corporate fund, so it wouldn't have an impact on that bond, those bonds.
Thank you. If there are no additional questions, I'd like a motion to accept the county administrator's report, place it on file. Ms. Cort and Mr. Harkey, and I'd just like to say this is, as usual, good news, and thank county employees and everybody involved for helping to keep our expenses down. It's looking like another good year budget-wise. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Didn't think so. That motion carries. Okay, moving on to the fiscal year 2014 draft budget. What I'm going to do is ask Deb to essentially make any comments that she has with regard to things that may have changed, things that she's done in response to the direction that we gave her in October. And then I will ask for once she's done, I'll ask for a motion to receive and place on file the draft budget. So Deb, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, going through the items that are listed on your agenda, the first ordinance with regard to the fees is simply to reflect the fee increases that the Finance Committee of the Whole approved in your motion on October 1st. The second item, the resolution amending the schedule of authorized positions for Champaign County, again, reflects the changes that the board approved on October 1st with regard to adding an investigator to the Public Defender's Office, adding 2 court services officers to probation for a pretrial services program, and adding a lieutenant to the Sheriff's Office corrections to implement and continue operating the new classification system there. The third item, drug court funding request. You set aside $200,000 on October 1st and indicated that you wanted to ensure that drug court was able to continue operating. We contacted Judge Ford, and his request is there in the packet. It's basically for just under $33,000, and that will enable the coordinator position to continue to be funded through the end of fiscal year 2014, which was the component of drug court that was at risk because the grant that has been paying for that coordinator's position is ending. And so their funding through the grant ends on March 31st. This would allow the county board to pick up funding for that position effective April 1st through December 31st. The next item, the general corporate fund budget summary, is a rather long document, but I will be happy to answer questions about it. Basically, what it does is incorporates everything that you had done prior to October 1st and on October 1st in a summary of the overall general corporate fund budget. So it documents the original budget process resolution where you gave direction about how the general corporate fund budgets should be prepared. All of those budgets as they were presented to you in August at the legislative budget hearings are reflected in this summary. And then the additional changes that you made are also reflected. Some of the highlights are the new positions that we just spoke about. And in terms of transitioning funding from public safety sales tax, what was originally budgeted as $891,000 from public safety sales tax to the fiscal plant budget for the payment of utilities costs is now about $450,000. And the two new positions for pretrial services, the new lieutenant for the sheriff's office, the evaluative, the data analysis evaluation for the sheriff's office, those would all not be paid for, they will be paid for through transfers from the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund. So unless there are questions about that, I would just take you next to the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund summary, which appears on page 160, where specifically what is being funded by public safety sales tax is spelled out. So it includes technology for the courts, which has always been paid to the Capital Asset Replacement Fund for courts technology. It also pays for software maintenance for the New World system, which is the technology that the Sheriff's Office uses, and a portion of the JANO system. The $230,613 for the 5% for delinquency prevention grant funding. And then the remainder of it is reflective of what you approved on October 1st. That would be numbers 5 through 8. You see $32,948 of the $200,000 is to be transferred to the drug course program grant, and the balance of that $200,000, $167,052 going to the grants line in the general corporate general county budget. This, again, changes the transfer to general corporate for utilities cost to $441,586, and then $6.2 million for debt service. And remember, there is a second annual principal payment and a third semi-annual interest payment included in that debt service. So that's an overview of the actions taken by the board on October 1st on the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund. The Drug Courts Program grant is provided on page 162 just to show that you are providing funding for that coordinator position through Public Safety Sales Tax. And then finally on page 165, the facilities replacement budget for the Capital Asset Replacement Fund. What is listed there are the items that were previously prioritized by the County Facilities Committee to be considered for project funding in fiscal year 2014. The total of those is more than the $532,261 that is going into the fund next year. I would point out to you that this department budget in the Capital Asset Replacement Fund has approximately $84,000 in reserve that is there from previous year's reserve placed in that fund, in that department fund, which is available to be appropriated if the county board selected or chose to do that, in addition to the $532,000 that is appropriated in next year's budget. I would also point out, and you have discussed this, so I know you're all aware of it, these items number 1 through 8 are priorities. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the actual amount you will spend, nor does it mean that we will actually end up doing all of those things out of this budget next year. But this gives some direction to the new facilities director of projects to develop to bring to you. I would also point out that with the exception of number 4, all of the 4 and 8, all of these projects would require the release of bid documents, so they would all come to the County Facilities Committee and to the full board for approval before they would be let or executed in the 2014 budget.
Deb, which of those were the ones that would not require being bid out?
The ones that are under 30,000, so it's 4 and 8.
4 and 8, okay, thank you.
And then the final thing is just to demonstrate for the board, the highway federal aid matching budget is provided for your information, where you can see that you have basically reinstated a substantial portion of that property tax to, again, rebuild that fund for future road projects.
Questions for Ms. Busey? Mr. Quisenberry was first, then you, Mr. Carter.
I was going to go ahead and make the motion to accept the budget and place it on file.
I think that's appropriate. Moved by Mr. Quisenberry, second by Mr. Harkey. I assume that it essentially is omnibus to subsume all of these, or
You are
subject to
correct.
all of the information that Ms. Busey's presented. Discussion. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry, did you want to go? He made the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to do, we put the, we raise all these prices, but how about minimum wage people? Do we think about them when we raise these prices?
Well, it costs the county money to provide these services, and we raised them to the level that we thought was appropriate based on the fee study we did and how much it costs to provide the services. I mean, if I had my druthers, I'd make the minimum wage higher, but that's not, I don't get to vote on that.
My feeling is, when you look at it, you have a big majority of people in Champaign County that work for Walmart and these stores, and they can't buy a good hamburger. If you find one that's on, you know, the budget, I think called a budget meal or something like that. Other than that, they have to work a whole hour and can't buy a good hamburger. So I'm saying, why don't we consider this? What is minimum wage now?
I'm sorry, Mr. Harkey? Thank you.
How much?
$8.25.
$8.25? That's what I'm saying. And I feel for those people. That's, you know.
Can't raise their wages, that's at the McDonald's.
Huh? Well, hear what I'm saying. They're most likely the one that, when I look at our people, we pay them pretty good. But below that, these are the people that most going to be doing business with these prices that we have.
I hear you, Mr. I hear you,
And
Mr.
I just,
I hear you. I mean, a lot of these fees have not been raised in many years. So
well,
I
it's
think
just
that-
a thought. I'm just throwing
hear
it
you.
out there because it looked like to me they are left behind all the time.
I mean, the county's not in business to make a profit, so, you know, we gotta take in enough money to cover the services we provide, and I guess that's the bottom line.
Well, we could send a letter to the state since we are a big body in this county. Say, raise up the minimum wage, Mr. Governor, or somebody.
Mr. James?
Deb, on the utility usage, since we're basically cutting that in half, and to the best of my knowledge, utilities have gone up historically, even though we are burning more candles at night here. Where's that gonna come from? General Corp?
Yes.
Okay, and then my next question would be, and I know everybody always moans and groans when I bring this up, the money that we're given for the 5% that's going for the youth, the juvenile prevention, how many groups is that money now supporting? Does anybody know? Is it 2 or 3?
A majority of that funding goes to the Regional Planning Commission for the programming that they do.
Is it, I thought it was still going to mental health. We had a intergovernmental
They're
agreement.
they administer it.
Okay. So is that money, I know there was an ordinance when I came on this board, and I've talked about it before. If things change and we start some of these other initiatives, and we've heard some of the public speak to some things they'd like to see.
Sorry, Mr. Carter? Mr. Carter? Mr. Carter, just keep it down a little bit. I'm having trouble hearing Mr.
Would there be
James.
any way
Thanks, sir.
for this board to look at that if the need became great and we were trying to do what we needed to do to redirect some of that money?
Well, that's why I've listed for you on the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund summary, everything that you're funding from the Public Safety Sales Tax. And I would add that the General Corporate Fund is also balanced as it's presented to you this evening, according to what we determined would be a balanced budget. It has less than a $980,000 deficit, which is attributable entirely to the 13th month not having property tax revenue and paying the additional debt service that is paid. So what you're asking are policy questions that are up to the board. What is reflected here is a reflection of the decisions that the board has made, which accomplishes a balanced budget for both general corporate and public safety at this point.
Thank you. And I guess if I could make a comment to that effect too, we're not going to spend any less on utilities next year than we spent last year. It's just we're changing where we're paying, what account we're paying for them out of. Mr. Carter?
It just kind of bothers me. I know we had a 2% program that went to the juvenile detention center. Oh,
5%.
it's on?
Yeah. Are you're talking about the public safety sales tax money that goes to delinquency prevention? That's 5%.
Wait. Are we talking about juvenile detention?
No, we're talking about juvenile delinquency prevention programs, which are 5% of the public safety sales tax by law goes to juvenile delinquency prevention programs.
Well, what's the difference?
Well, juvenile detention's locking them up. Juvenile delinquency prevention's helping them not get locked up.
Well, I thought that's what the center was for down there.
Well, the center's for locking them up. The 5% is programs
Yeah.
to try to keep them out of trouble in the first place.
Well, you were around, but we had a program for that before.
It's the same program. It's been going on for years. I mean, that
No,
5%.
they opted money out and gave it to mental health.
No, it's the same, the 5%'s been there ever since the public safety sales tax has been there.
Well, is this a different program we're talking about?
I'm not sure what you're talking about. The 5% of the public safety sales tax goes to juvenile delinquency prevention programs, always has,
Man.
goes to RPC, and they figure out who to give it to.
Wait.
I'm not sure, I'd like to answer your question, but I'm not sure I understand it.
There's something don't sound right here. I'm gonna tell you. It's a juvenile program, right?
The 5% of the public safety sales tax goes to a juvenile program. It's to help prevent juvenile delinquency. So work with kids to keep them out of trouble.
Well, we had a determined program for them,
That's it.
huh?
That's it. Still there. It's always
But
been
then
there.
what
It
we
still
said,
is.
we tacking on another.
No, it's always been, it's the same 5% we've always spent. Last year, the year before, ever since there's been a public safety sales tax, we spent 5% of it on that program, and we still are. Am I wrong? I mean, maybe somebody else understands what you're asking.
Would you like me to just give you an overview of what it's being used for?
When I asked the question, the county used to have
Okay.
justice and social oversight. We did an intergovernmental agreement with the mental health board. They now get that 5%, but they do the delinquency stuff just like they always have. I was asking the question, can that be changed if need to be? And thank you for supporting that.
And the answer is, it can't get smaller, but we could change who we gave it to.
And in fiscal year 2014, the entire amount from the public safety sales tax is going to the Regional Planning Commission for a court diversion program and the Juvenile Assessment Center, which Mr. McGuire spoke about earlier this evening.
So the previous program that you gave to the mental health, what they doing with that money?
Your contract with the Mental Health Board is for them to delineate the roles and responsibilities. They handle the administration of it in terms of issuing an RFP for grants and making decisions about the award of the funding. They don't actually get the money themselves. They award the money for the county board based on the best programming recommendations that they receive, and they don't charge the county board anything for that administrative oversight.
They don't, well, damn, look, the money came from us.
That's right.
Yep.
Well, then why they have to give us something?
What? I'm sorry, I'm not following. I mean, we give the money, the money goes to those two organizations that Ms. Busey mentioned. That's the bottom line. And none of it disappears along the way. It all goes to those two, that 5% of the public safety sales tax goes to those two groups. And it's the
Okay.
same program we've always had.
I guess I hear, and I just have to go down there and see what's going on. Yeah.
Be my guest, Mr. Carter. Please let us know what you find out. Ms. Michaels.
I just have a couple questions. Do you know approximately how much that 5% is, kind of around?
It's $230,613.
Okay. That's fine.
Approximately.
Yeah, I just want to, yeah. And then the next thing I have is, back on this page 160, is this 167,000 that we were talking about putting aside for, it says that it's focusing on reentry and our mental health services for inmates of the jail. So that would only be adults, or could it be anybody that was in the jail system? That's my question. Because to me, sometimes it seems like when they're younger, you want to catch that and work with them if,
I think the answer is yes, and that
Okay.
money hasn't been programmed yet. Ms. Petrie?
First a question. It's on page 126. As I look at all the fee increases, they're dead on to what was recommended by the consulting firm, except marriage licenses, and that's twice of what's recommended. I have a little trouble justifying this to constituents, so can I have some help why that one is the only one out of all of them here that is double the suggested amount?
All of the other fee increases go above the statutory maximums for those fees, but you've documented through a cost analysis study that it's reasonable to charge more than the statutory maximum. The recommendation for the marriage and civil union license is that it be set at the statutory maximum, which is $75.
Okay, well, this is going to be an omnibus motion, but I have trouble with that high amount for the marriage fee. To answer Diane about that money, the money that comes from mental health to RPC that Darling Koppel, oh, no, but they do a lot of the intervention that you're talking about when you were questioning about the 166,000 was all. Okay, there are a couple of things that I want on the public record in relationship to this budget. First is that I am going to assume that the appropriate people will look for supportive funding to continue drug court after this funding that we're approving this evening. And it's a good program, but I would like to see some effort finding some more grant money for that. Second, the indicators that are listed on page 164, the performance indicators for drug court, they're on page 164. For me, as a researcher, they're not satisfying indicators in relationship to effectiveness of the program. And the last, which I've mentioned previously, and I hope Mental Health Board and Developmental Disabilities Board and others that get funding approved by the county board do start making a more concerted effort to show reliability and validity in the programs that we are helping them fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie. Any other comments, questions, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? I'll declare that motion passed. That concludes finance, and I will hand the chair back over to Mr. Schrader. I'm sorry. Yeah, consent. A1 and 2, C 2, 3, 4, and 5, D1, G, F, G1, 2, and 4, H1, I1, H1 and I1.
Thank you. Now to other business. I think the closed session minutes were circulating around. Did everyone see them? Moved by Mr. Quisenberry, seconded by Mr. Langenheim. All those in favor of approval of the minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Motion to adjourn. Mr. Harkey, Mr. J. James, we're adjourned.